There is a comfortable belief that almost everyone carries without examining it. The idea that evil is the supreme force behind destruction. That malicious intent, the will to do harm, is the primary engine of human suffering. It sounds logical. It's easy to accept. And it is almost entirely false. Evil is visible. Stupidity, by contrast, is banal. Evil has a face. Stupidity has millions. Evil appears as an exception. Stupidity appears as normality, and what is normal almost always escapes vigilance. Most people mentally prepare to fight evil. Very few are prepared to be crushed by stupidity, because stupidity announces nothing. It asks for no permission. It doesn't appear dangerous. It doesn't even appear intentional. That is precisely why it is devastating. Your automatic reaction is to see stupidity as a weakness, as something harmless, as a lack of intelligence, not as an active force. That is the first error. Stupidity is not the absence of intelligence. It is the absence of awareness combined with certainty, and that combination is explosive. A bad man knows, at least vaguely, that he is bad. A stupid man is convinced he is right, and there is no force more dangerous than unexamined certainty. Biologically, we are built to follow, to imitate, to react quickly, not deeply. The brain was not designed for truth. It was designed for social survival. To not stand out, to not be excluded, to not think too much when the group appears safe. This structure functions acceptably in a small tribe. It becomes catastrophic in a large mass. Stupidity appears when survival reactions are applied to contexts that require analysis. But analysis is uncomfortable. Analysis isolates, so it is avoided. Stupidity does not mean a lack of information. We live in an age saturated with information. Stupidity is the inability to suspend reaction, the inability to say, "I don't know yet," the inability to sit with discomfort for a few seconds longer. Socially, stupidity is rewarded. Not officially, but consistently. People who react quickly are seen as confident. People with firm opinions are perceived as leaders. People who do not hesitate are confused with those who understand. No one applauds inner caution. No one rewards strategic silence. This is how the first illusion of power is formed. The illusion that the loudest voice is also the most competent. The illusion that immediate reaction is a sign of clarity. In reality, it is exactly the opposite. Evil has limits. Evil must hide. Evil must calculate. Evil must anticipate consequences. Stupidity has no such constraints. Stupidity is free. Stupidity does not fear consequences because it does not see them. That is why historically, the greatest disasters were not caused by a few brilliant, malicious individuals, but by large masses of people convinced they were doing the right thing. People who did not consider themselves evil, people who slept peacefully. Power learns this difference very early. Those who understand the game do not rely on their own evil. They rely on the stupidity of others. It is cheaper, more predictable, easier to trigger. You don't need to convince a stupid person. You only need to confirm their existing certainty. You don't need to force them. You only need to offer a vague enemy. You don't need to control them directly. They will control themselves as long as they believe their reaction is moral. This is where exploitation appears, not as a sophisticated conspiracy, but as a simple mechanism, a triggered emotion, a short story, an identified culprit, and a sense of righteousness. That's it. The rest follows on its own. Stupidity is the perfect fuel for power systems that do not want to appear oppressive. Because stupidity demands rules on its own, demands punishment on its own, demands conformity on its own. Evil would be too obvious. Stupidity is invisible. Notice how often you react before you think, how often you feel the need to have an opinion immediately, how uncomfortable the space becomes when you don't yet know what to believe. That is where vulnerability begins, not in a lack of intelligence, but in the rush to prove it. An intelligent person who reacts emotionally is more dangerous than a calm, stupid person, because intelligence without control becomes an amplifier, and emotion provides the direction. The result is efficient stupidity. That is why real power does not fear intelligence. It fears lucidity. Intelligence can be hijacked. Lucidity cannot. Lucidity stops reaction. It creates pause, and pause breaks the chain. But pause is perceived as weakness, as indecision, as a lack of backbone. This is how the individual is socialized: to respond, to react, to not leave empty space. Empty space frightens. Stupidity fills that space immediately, with certainty, with emotion, with judgment. And everyone breathes a sigh of relief, even if the direction is wrong. Evil could not function without this collective relief, without this rush to close the conversation, to shut down thinking, to apply a label and move on. When you begin to see this, something changes. Not dramatically, not emotionally, but structurally. You notice that the real danger does not come from the clear intention to do harm, but from the reflex to simplify, to reduce, to react. True domination is not exercised through force, but through the direction of stupidity. By letting people believe they chose for themselves, that their reaction was authentic, that their anger was justified. A bad man must hide from you. Stupidity makes you hide from yourself. And perhaps the most uncomfortable truth is this: no one is immune. Stupidity is not a category of people. It is a state, temporary, recurrent, easy to trigger, and often pleasant, because it spares you effort. When you stop thinking, you feel light. When you react, you feel alive. When you judge, you feel superior. All of these are neurological rewards, and all of them are exploitable. Real power is not seen in those who dominate through fear. It is seen in those who no longer react, who observe how stupidity circulates, how it spreads, how it is encouraged, and who remain silent exactly where others feel the need to shout. This is the first crack in the illusion. And it is not comfortable, because it involves recognizing that many of your reactions were not yours. They were triggered, guided, almost automatic. This is not an accusation, it is an observation, one that most people never make, because it would require giving up the idea that they are fully autonomous in their thinking. From here on, the pressure increases, not from the outside, from the inside, because once you see the mechanism, you can no longer ignore it. And stupidity, once recognized as a force, no longer appears innocent. It appears inevitable. And that is precisely why it must be understood, not fought. As you begin to see stupidity as a mechanism, not an insult, a subtle shift occurs. You no longer get angry as easily. Not because you have become better, but because you have become more attentive. Anger arises when you still believe things could have gone differently, when you still assume intention where there is only reflex. Stupidity functions like a distribution system. It does not create ideas, it spreads them. It does not invent directions, it accelerates them. That is why it is more powerful than evil. Evil is local, stupidity is viral. A single evil individual can cause limited damage. He has a body, a time span, a range. Stupidity has no such limits. You pass through it daily. You inhale it without wanting to. You repeat it without noticing. You defend it without understanding it. Here lies one of the most uncomfortable observations. Stupidity feels like morality. It dresses itself in convictions. It hides in indignation. It speaks in the tone of righteousness. And that is precisely why it is protected. Any attempt to expose it is interpreted as an attack. When someone reacts stupidly, they do not see themselves as stupid. They see themselves as correct, as being on the right side, as being necessary. This self-legitimation is the key. Evil needs external justifications. Stupidity justifies itself. Psychologically, this is predictable. The brain prefers internal coherence over external truth. It prefers being right to being correct. And when information threatens self-image, it is rejected, not analyzed, not evaluated, rejected. As you begin to see stupidity as a mechanism, not an insult, a subtle shift occurs. You no longer get angry as easily, not because you have become better, but because you have become more attentive. Anger arises when you still believe things could have gone differently, when you still assume intention where there is only reflex. Stupidity functions like a distribution system. It does not create ideas, it spreads them. It does not invent directions, it accelerates them. That is why it is more powerful than evil. Evil is local, stupidity is viral. A single evil individual can cause limited damage. He has a body, a time span, a range. Stupidity has no such limits. You pass through it daily. You inhale it without wanting to. You repeat it without noticing. You defend it without understanding it. Here lies one of the most uncomfortable observations. Stupidity feels like morality. It dresses itself in convictions. It hides in indignation. It speaks in the tone of righteousness. And that is precisely why it is protected. Any attempt to expose it is interpreted as an attack. When someone reacts stupidly, they do not see themselves as stupid. They see themselves as correct, as being on the right side, as being necessary. This self-legitimation is the key. Evil needs external justifications. Stupidity justifies itself. Psychologically, this is predictable. The brain prefers internal coherence over external truth. It prefers being right to being correct. And when information threatens self-image, it is rejected, not analyzed, not evaluated, rejected. As you begin to see stupidity as a mechanism, not an insult, a subtle shift occurs. You no longer get angry as easily, not because you have become better, but because you have become more attentive. Anger arises when you still believe things could have gone differently, when you still assume intention where there is only reflex. Stupidity functions like a distribution system. It does not create ideas, it spreads them. It does not invent directions, it accelerates them. That is why it is more powerful than evil. Evil is local, stupidity is viral. A single evil individual can cause limited damage. He has a body, a time span, a range. Stupidity has no such limits. You pass through it daily. You inhale it without wanting to. You repeat it without noticing. You defend it without understanding it. Here lies one of the most uncomfortable observations. Stupidity feels like morality. It dresses itself in convictions. It hides in indignation. It speaks in the tone of righteousness. And that is precisely why it is protected. Any attempt to expose it is interpreted as an attack. When someone reacts stupidly, they do not see themselves as stupid. They see themselves as correct, as being on the right side, as being necessary. This self-legitimation is the key. Evil needs external justifications. Stupidity justifies itself. Psychologically, this is predictable. The brain prefers internal coherence over external truth. It prefers being right to being correct. And when information threatens self-image, it is rejected, not analyzed, not evaluated, rejected. This is how loops are created. Groups of people repeating the same ideas until they become impermeable. Not because the ideas are solid, but because they are familiar. Familiarity is confused with truth. Repetition with validation. Power observes these loops and does not break them. It feeds them. Not because it is diabolical, but because it is efficient. You don't need to invent anything new. You only need to amplify what already exists. Stupidity does the rest. Here appears the illusion of choice. People believe they arrived at their conclusions on their own, that their opinion is the result of independent thinking. In reality, it is the result of selective exposure, of stimulated emotions, of the comfort of not being alone. A person who truly thinks is uncomfortable, not because they are intelligent, but because they do not react as expected. They do not align instantly. They do not confirm the collective emotion. They create pause, and pause is destabilizing. That is why societies do not necessarily punish intelligence. They punish ambiguity. They punish the refusal to take a position immediately, because a position offers stability, even if it is wrong. Lack of position forces reflection, and reflection is slow. Stupidity is fast. It has answers. It has culprits. It has simple solutions. Evil must justify itself. Stupidity only points a finger, and that is enough. Observe how modern conflicts are constructed, not through complex arguments, but through emotional triggers. A few words, an image, a fragment, and reaction is guaranteed. Not because people are being manipulated in sophisticated ways, but because they are predictable. Predictability is the real currency of power, not loyalty, not intelligence, but the ability to anticipate reaction. Stupidity offers this ability at scale because reactions are standardized. Outrage, fear, desire for punishment, desire for belonging. Evil would struggle to operate in a world of lucid people. Stupidity paves its way, makes its work invisible, provides moral excuses, provides critical mass. Here is where it becomes personal, because we are no longer talking about others. We are talking about your moments, the situations where you reacted without checking, the moments when you felt you had to have an opinion, the moments when you confused emotional intensity with validity. You do not need to recall concrete examples. Your body already knows them. The tension in the chest, the mental rush, the urge to respond. These are the signals, not of evil, of stupidity forming. The difference between someone who is used and someone who is not does not lie in intelligence. It lies in the capacity to delay reaction, to stay a few seconds longer with discomfort, to not immediately turn stimulus into conclusion. This is extremely difficult because it is not rewarded. You receive no applause for silence, no validation for restraint. On the contrary, you become suspect, vague, hard to place. But that is exactly what removes you from the flow of stupidity, not through opposition, but through non-participation. Evil wants enemies. Stupidity wants consensus. If you refuse both, you become invisible to the mechanism. Not powerful in the classical sense, but untouched. This is a form of self-mastery few reach, not because they could not, but because it seems useless because it offers no immediate satisfaction, because it does not feed the ego. The ego wants certainty. It wants to be right. It wants to be seen. Stupidity offers all of these at minimal cost. Lucidity demands renunciation of reaction, of certainty, of temporary identity. Here the paths separate. Most choose the comfort of functional stupidity. A minority learn to observe without intervening, not out of superiority, but out of realism. Because once you see how little it takes to trigger entire masses, you can no longer take personal reactions as deep truths. You see them as reflexes, as patterns, as noise. This perspective does not make you happier. It makes you more stable. And stability is far rarer than declarative happiness. At this point, it becomes clear that the fight against evil is often a distraction. Evil is symptomatic. Stupidity is the infrastructure. As long as the infrastructure remains, evil will always reconfigure itself. There is nothing heroic here, nothing dramatic, just a cold observation. Power does not need monsters. It needs automatic reactions. People who believe they feel because they think, and think because they feel. When this circuit is interrupted even temporarily, something rare appears. Inner space, a space where you are not pulled in all directions, a space where you do not have to prove anything. That does not make you invincible. It makes you harder to use, and for those who understand the game, that is enough. When the circle begins to close, there is no revelation, no triumphant moment. There is only a denser silence. A kind of inner weight that does not press down but does not disappear either. It is the weight of things seen clearly. At this point, something that once seemed abstract becomes evident. Stupidity is not chaos, it is primitive order. It is the way the mind simplifies the world to make it bearable. Evil disrupts this order, stupidity stabilizes it. That is why it is tolerated. That is why it is protected. That is why it is more durable. Evil provokes resistance. Stupidity creates conformity. Evil divides the world into victims and aggressors. Stupidity divides it into us and them. And this division is far more efficient because it requires no evidence, only feeling. Feeling is enough. It always has been. Power does not install itself where people are forced. It installs itself where people offer themselves, where they believe they choose, where they believe their reaction is personal, authentic, justified. Stupidity provides this perfect illusion. Once you understand this, the need to convince disappears, to correct, to save. These impulses are, more often than not, extensions of the same dynamic. The desire to change the other is often just a disguised reaction. Lucidity has no missions, no agendas, no need to be distributed. It either exists or it does not. And where it exists, reaction slows. Judgment is delayed. Identity becomes more flexible. This is dangerous for systems built on predictability. A person who does not react immediately is hard to categorize, hard to use, hard to mobilize, and therefore irrelevant to most power games. There is no need to oppose. Opposition is still reaction. It is enough not to enter, not to rush, not to feel the need to have an answer to everything. This absence of reaction is more destabilizing than any criticism. Stupidity feeds on participation, on emotional energy, on confirmation. Without these, it withers temporarily. It does not disappear, but it loses traction. Here, the difference between control and self-mastery appears. Control attempts to modify the exterior. Self-mastery regulates the interior. Control is loud. Self-mastery is almost invisible. A self-mastered person does not appear powerful. They appear distant, uninvolved. sometimes even indifferent. But this appearance is deceptive, because beneath it lies a constant choice, the choice not to react automatically, not to confuse stimulus with meaning. This is a silent discipline. It offers no quick rewards, no social validation, but it offers something far rarer, stable clarity. Over time, you begin to see stupidity before it fully manifests. You recognize it in rhythm, in tone, in false urgency, in the need for conclusion. It no longer surprises you, no longer attracts you. It becomes an observable phenomenon, not a field you are absorbed into. That changes the balance of power, not externally, internally. You are no longer pulled into battles that are not yours, no longer mobilized by emotions that lead nowhere, no longer investing energy in reactions that self-destruct. Evil continues to exist, obviously, but without the infrastructure of stupidity, it becomes limited, visible, manageable. Stupidity, on the other hand, without your participation, becomes mere background noise. This is not about moral superiority. That would be just another trap. It is about internal economy, where you place your attention, what you allow to move your mind. Attention is the real resource. Emotion is the vehicle through which it is extracted. Stupidity is the mechanism that makes extraction efficient. When you refuse to react, you interrupt the chain, without grand gestures, without declarations. At this point, you no longer feel the need to prove that you understand. Understanding feels different, less expansive, less vocal, harder to express, and precisely for that reason, more real. The quiet that appears is not peace. It is the absence of unnecessary friction. It is the lack of the need to always be on guard, to always be on the right side, to react to every stimulus as if it mattered. Most stimuli do not matter. Most conflicts are recycled. Most indignations are temporary. Stupidity makes them seem urgent. Lucidity places them in context. In the end, there is nothing left to say, because what needed to be understood was not a new concept, but an old reflex. The reflex to react, to simplify, to judge quickly. When that reflex weakens, you do not become passive. You become selective. And selection is a far more refined form of power than reaction. There is no triumphant conclusion, no lesson to apply. There is only a shift in weight, a relocation of the center, from exterior to interior, from emotion to observation. Stupidity remains more powerful than evil. It probably always will be, but it is no longer as convincing, no longer as personal. It no longer grips you the same way. And in that distance, something rare appears. Not enthusiasm, not hope, but a solid silence, one in which emotional reaction finally feels primitive.